hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
Well, Jimmy Kimmel was fired because he had bad ratings more than anything else, and he said a horrible thing about a great gentleman known as Charlie Kirk. And Jimmy Kimmel is not a talented person. He had very bad ratings, and they should have fired him a long time ago.
Meanwhile, in other ABC news, young Jimmy Kimmel's coming back to television. I tell you, Jimmy Kimmel's flying high like Advil today.
I'm so happy for them. Plus, now that Jimmy's not being canceled, I get to enjoy this again.
What a difference just under a week makes. After being yanked off airwaves for angering Donald Trump and Trump supporters, U.S. late-night host Jimmy Kimmel will be back on TV tonight. Disney, the parent company of ABC, which airs Kimmel's show, released a statement to that effect that reads in part, "We have spent the last days having thoughtful conversations with Jimmy, and after those conversations, we reached the decision to return the show on Tuesday." Let's bring back the front bench to talk about that. Dan Moulton, Larissa Waller, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stoner here. Larissa, I'll start with you. What does it say to you that the show is coming back, and what do you think the impetus is? I would point out that Sinclair and I think it's Nexstar, the two companies that own a bunch of affiliates, won't put it back on, but the Disney as a parent company decided to.
Yeah, and we talked about this on the radio earlier today. I'll start off by saying, as much as we criticize the mainstream media in Canada, I feel like most Canadians and most journalists and most pundits like us are just watching this in the States, so grateful that that's not us and that's not our reality. We saw when Donald Trump won, we saw all these companies really start sucking up to him, right? And really start towing that Trump line. And I think that that's what happened with this example. And I think that that was, you know, Disney's point of view was like, what would Donald Trump want us to do? And you got to think about why, right? So there must be something else that Disney's asking the government for or asking Donald Trump's approval on, and they're trying to curry favor with him. And I think that they walked it back because the economics didn't make sense. You know, we heard that Disney lost a lot of money since this ban. And just one more point to this, you know, Donald Trump was saying like he disrespected a great man named Charlie Kirk. And I agreed with a lot of what Charlie Kirk said. The biggest thing Charlie Kirk would talk about is freedom of speech and honoring those people that you disagree with. And I think that this is actually flying in the face of what Charlie Kirk would have stood for.
Well, I think that points to, Laura, that there wasn't consensus on the right in the United States behind this move. There were, in fact, a lot of prominent Republicans, for example, like Ted Cruz, who were speaking out quite explicitly, in particular about the FCC bending to the president's whim.
Yes, I think that it's pressure from Republicans themselves that likely led to this decision. I think Ted Cruz likened the comments from the FCC chairman to a mob boss and just said, like, we should not be weighing into these battles. And I think they have the foresight to see that, you know, when the pendulum swings back, they don't want this when the Democrats are in power, right? Again, which might happen unless Trump remains president forever. But, you know, this is not something that the FCC should be weighing into. It went too far. So I think that had a lot to do with it. I think that, you know, this whole debacle is probably going to be great for ratings. I would expect, you know, Jimmy Kimmel's show to do wonders tonight. I think Sarah McLachlan's on as well as a musical guest, so there's obviously a Canadian connection always. But no, I think it was pressure. But I think with the affiliate channels, stepping back, the Nexstar and Sinclair, it shows that there's still business interests at play, right? Because Nexstar, I believe, is waiting for a merger approval as well. So I think this whole episode has, you know, it sends a chill around free speech, you know, around the line between entertainment and commentary. And I think Larissa is completely right that Canada is kind of watching with horror and thinking, you know, this is not something that the government should ever be weighing into. And, you know, hopefully it doesn't happen again.
Very curious to see, Kathleen, tonight how Jimmy Kimmel actually addresses it, how far he goes, like what, because those two companies that own those affiliate stations had demanded like a donation to the organization that Charlie Kirk founded, and then also like a formal apology. That hasn't transpired. I think the only thing that he's posted is something on Instagram today, a picture of himself with Norman Lear, who was a target for Nixon at the time. Like, that's it. What will you be watching?
And what's reported so far in places like the Hollywood Reporter supporters that he hasn't actually agreed to any kind of concession, any kind of real apology. So
well, how could he?
How could he? Yeah. Exactly. So I mean, he's going to be taping his opening monologue like momentarily, essentially, and so wait to see. But I think what's really problematic is that we have seen Trump time and time again use kind of regulatory pressure as a tool of political control, right? And he did that with the tech CEOs, as Larissa mentioned. We saw them all fall in line and start donating to his various campaigns and the inaugural balls at the very beginning. And he's continued that pressure. And what that really is something that's called like anticipatory obedience. Like corporate obedience to Trump is really terrifying. And I wouldn't say that we're immune to it in Canada, actually. It could drift up here as well. But I think, I guess on the happy note is that we also saw people power in this. We saw people protesting against ABC and Disney. We saw enormous cancellations in Hulu and Disney. In fact, Google search noted that it was an all-time high spike of people searching, how do I cancel my Disney account? And,
of course, none of us actually know how to. That's why our streaming bills are through the roof.
Kids do. My kids could figure that out, but I couldn't figure that out. There was actually a small hit to their bottom line, but I think that also remembering that people have power, right? And I think that's a lesson to take away from that. We saw actors, everyone from Meryl Streep to Robert De Niro kind of coming out and supporting and that people power. So I hope we see more of that in the face of this corporate obedience that we see time and time again.
It's a great point to bring up because also it has felt like that has dissipated so severely under when you and it's corporate obedience. It's countries that capitulate on tariffs. It's and I'm not talking about us, but I'm talking about everyone outside of us in China largely. Like it is. You certainly have a sense like this is a new reality that we live in. So this is the first time, I would argue, in months that we've seen any kind of opposition organize and fight back.
Yeah, I don't know what Jimmy Kimmel is going to say tonight, but I think the one thing I know for sure is that Donald Trump's probably given him the best ratings he's had in a very long time. This is going to be a response heard around the world. I think a lot of people are going to be tuning in with a lot of interest to see how he makes light of this situation, how he pokes fun at the president in this moment, and to your point, whether or not there's any sort of sense of humility in what he has to say today. I think that will be really interesting. Yeah. I hope not to see that, but we will see if that's something he brings into it. On your point on standing up, I think it's really interesting. We've seen a political experiment in this country that resonated with voters around pushing back and standing up to an assertive White House that is completely different than anything the world has ever experienced before. Leaders around the world are trying different approaches, but it seems to me that in Western democracies, where leaders are trying to roll over or trying to suck up to Donald Trump, it's not going over well for them with their voters, right? I mean, in democracies where you have to be responsible to your voters who expect you to stand up for your interest and stand up for your country, when leaders are failing to do that, their numbers tend to be plummeting. And I think if you look to the UK, Keir Starmer's gone through that, right? The kind of embarrassing show that was the state visit last week, his original invitation for Trump to come visit the king again, all that was kind of embarrassing, and I think voters are penalizing them for it, frankly, in a way that we haven't seen in this country.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think there's a debate over kind of the way that things are going here in that vein, but I do take your point that relative to those other leaders,
yeah, I mean, I think the outcome of the federal election was a response on that. And I think the popularity the Prime Minister continues to see is a reaction to how voters see him dealing with this situation.
Fair point. Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the discussion. Dan Moulton, Larissa Waller, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone, our wonderful front bench.